I'd like to begin my session by reading a portion of Pope John Paul II's World Day Communication Message of 2002, entitled Internet, a New Forum for Proclaiming the Gospel. The essence of the Internet, in fact, is that it provides an almost unending flood of information, much of which passes in a moment. In a culture which feeds on the ephemeral, there can easily be a risk of believing that it is facts that matter rather than values. The Internet offers extensive knowledge, but it does not teach values. And when values are discarded, our very humanity is demeaned, and man easily loses sight of his transcendent dignity. Despite its enormous potential for good, some of the degrading and damaging ways in which the Internet can be used are already obvious to all. Again, Pope John Paul II wrote this in 2002, and if you recall my first session when I overviewed the history, it was only in 2002 that some of the social networking sites like MySpace and Facebook only are becoming available. So he's already so aware and trying to raise our level of consciousness about this in such a profound way. So while electronic media can provide useful information, media used solely for pleasure or for the reception of information can foster a posture of passivity. Indiscriminate reception of images, even if they're good images, that indiscriminate reception can dull the mind. Bits of information that are passively received but are not integrated as knowledge can become a problem in ways that we have already described in some of our prior sessions. If passive reception predominates, emotions may overcome the capacity to reason and the imagination becomes uncontrolled. And that's what St. Thomas would say about sloth. Sloth is kind of a passive reception, and it literally dulls the mind, triggers the imagination in a way that it wanders where it wills because it's not being directed by our own will with a purpose. Mary Ann Wolfe is a developmental psychologist at Tufts University who's been studying the Internet's effects on how we read. She says the Internet's reading style places efficiency and immediacy above all else, weakening the capacity for the kind of deep reading that emerged when the printing press first came out. So this is a psychologist who's been studying specifically Internet. When we read online, she wrote, we tend to become mere decoders of information. The Internet scatters our attention and diffuses our concentration, is what she's really saying here. She continues, quote, if we lose those quiet spaces on or fill them up with content, we will sacrifice something important, not only something in ourselves, but in our culture. This article was in the Atlantic Monthly in September of 2008 as a citation by the author of this article, a man by the name of Nicholas Carr, and the title of his article in this is Google Making Us Stupid? We can all relate to a tendency to speed read for information due to the magnitude of material that comes our way requiring a response, not necessarily online, but through all kinds of material that requires reading, teachers, you just get a lot of things you have to go through. Healthcare professionals now, there's so much paperwork that you need to go through. But do we find ourselves beginning to apply that same speed reading tactic to the gospel during our time of prayer? If so, this can be a kind of wake-up call to be more attentive to how we approach incoming communication. Most certainly the Word of God. Most certainly our time in prayer. But as well, all kinds of incoming bits of information. An indulging inquisitiveness of the central perceptions of the world is a reference that is made by Joseph Pieper when he looks at St. Thomas's description of intemperance. An indulging inquisitiveness of the central perceptions of the world. So what he's saying then is not only internet, because he wrote this before the advent of the internet, but watching TV for hours about some major world events. I consult my own experience during 9/11, the earthquake in Haiti, or some local news that was bothersome here in Denver with the Columbine situation, or more locally we had the murder of an elderly woman in her bedroom. How we can get kind of lulled to wanting to just to understand somehow and view and review, and certainly the news will view and review for us these just bothersome, emotionally stirring events that can catch our attention. Remember, that's the currency of attention that some of these media can induce in us. But we need to ask ourselves where we're being informed and where being informed ends, and where we are indulging in inquisitiveness. I think that's an important distinction to make. Concupiscence of the eyes does not aim at perceiving reality, St. Thomas would say, but to enjoy, quote, seeing for the sake of a sensual enticement that somehow is gratifying. It can be gratifying positively, but it can also be gratifying in the sense that it stirs that curiosity. And he would call an intemperance of the eyes curiositos rather than studiositos. Study would be to be informed, and the other would be to be curious. You wonder if that saying, curiosity kills the cat, came from. I don't know how the cat got involved in that, but I can ponder a little kitty checking out things and maybe getting into trouble, I guess. I don't know. Concupiscence of the eyes does not strive for knowledge for the sake of truth, but for the possibility of being enticed into, and today with the inordinate availability of sensual material, to really be consumed by such a sensual experience. So curiositos is named the roaming unrest of the spirit, and that comes from the Summa Theologica, the second part of the second part, question 35, Article 3, reply to objection 3. So this is, St. Thomas was so beautiful in consulting the experience. So it's a roaming unrest of the spirit. And you can know yourself agitated when you have that imagination just really stirred in a way that there's a little bit of a bother or a little bit of enticement that doesn't allow you to really be peaceful with what you're taking in. Unbridled desire, or the burst into diversity with all these visual images and now the sound that can be associated with the videos and the YouTubes, is not oriented to unity or to integration. Concupiscence of the eyes reaches extremes when it builds itself a world according to its own image and likeness. The form of intemperance that is being seen now with regards to building its own image and likeness that came to mind when I was looking at these description of concupiscence by St. Thomas and some of what Joseph Pieper wrote in his Four Virtues was with these social networking sites and how certainly sometimes in persons that come to me as a psychiatrist, but also much more in the literature. And when I go to some of these professional meetings, it's destroying some marriages because you can quote friend, and so some of these married people are being friended by some of their high school friends. Some of them used to be girlfriends or boyfriends, and they begin to share. And if you remember the three qualities of the regressive tendency with internet, which is a very common effect of internet behavior, is that flirtatiousness. It's just little tintillating messages that becomes affirming, maybe a little self-soothing, that those can develop further into relationships that aren't really even based in the here and now, that very painfully have caused tensions in marriages. Something that wasn't anticipated, but now is becoming something that is bothersomely more and more common, this inordinate reception of images, is pornography. Internet pornography now apparently is the most common confession of men. I have heard this by so many priests across the country, where this is a topic that they're asking to have be presented because they're not necessarily sure how it occurs. It's actually been a surprise to the professional field. As a psychiatrist, when I went to the national meeting, let's say 8 years ago, persons there weren't worried about internet pornography. It's a free will choice, it's just an image, it's not a problem. But the last 4 or 5 years, there are now more workshops and more papers written on how this has become truly an addiction in a fashion that was never anticipated to be possible before. But when you think of addiction, whenever something is pleasurable that can be taken in without face-to-face contact, there is a greater potential for abuse. And this has been really the case with the availability of internet regarding pornography. A more scary aspect of it is that the more frequent users of internet pornography are teenagers, boys, between the ages of 12 and 17. 90% of boys that have been surveyed now through many studies have reported that they first have their access of internet pornography while doing their homework. So pornographers begin to try to lure them into some of these sites because what happens when you're 12, 13? You're going into puberty. So you're a little confused, you have some of these sexual thoughts and feelings, you're having some changes, you don't know what to do with what's going on inside of you. You're trying to discover and understand, you're curious, and they get lured into some of these sites that become something that's secretive. They don't talk about it, and yet they are becoming habituated, and they don't even appreciate that it's a problem. Now we're finding, though, that the average age of first exposure to internet pornography last year, when I did a research on this topic, was 11 years old. This year, when I looked, it's now down to 8 years old. And what is happening with the pornographers is they are putting up websites, and they're naming their websites Disneyland or Snow White. And so these kids are typing this on, and all of a sudden, it's pornographic images that pops up. And as these kids are a bit surprised and trying to exit out, a technique that's called mouse trapping, it won't let them get out. And if they keep hitting the exit, it pops into often another pornographic site. And these kids are becoming embarrassed. Most of them don't say anything to their parents. And so parents are being encouraged to ask their children or to educate their children, to tell them not to be afraid if they have this kind of exposure, so they can be aided and guided into how to not become really victimized by some of this that's going on now with the pornography. I spoke about the cell phone in my second session and wanted to wait until this session where I'm talking about images that are disturbing, that are going on with cell phones. Pornographers are complaining that they're losing money because individuals now don't even need to buy pornographic videos or DVDs or whatever else it is, because more and more persons are making their own. There's a new distribution of pornography that's taking place that has now a new word called sexting, and I'm sure many of you are aware with what sexting is. But sexting is slang for sending sexually explicit or suggestive content between mobile devices. And sexting contains either texts or images or videos that are intended to be sexually arousing. So this is going on more and more amongst certainly the youth, some young adults. There's a survey done in 2008 by the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy. And they found that 1 in 5 teenagers, 22%, say they have electronically sent or posted a nude or semi-nude image of themselves. 22% of those surveyed were girls, and 18% of those surveyed were boys. Sexually suggestive messages, just the message, not the image, that is by text or email on the cell phone, was even more common than images, where 39% of teens said that they sent or posted such a message, and 50% of teens said they had received them. So I'm having parents sometimes call my office or speak with me, say, what do I do? You know, my boy got this picture of a girl, and they're kind of interested in one another, but it was a semi-nude picture of her. What's also happening is, once you get this picture, with cyberbullying, some of these pictures are being just sent out, and these kids don't know where they might be sent, but they're used to be made fun of or to embarrass. So it's opened up a whole kind of inappropriateness of behavior that just never had to be considered before. So I think this whole aspect of the indiscriminate use of bits of data and images is at a critical point in our society today that is so pervasive that it almost demands attention. It's so demanding of attention that, like I'm saying, the secular world is looking at it, because what they didn't anticipate is how addictive internet pornography is. And it's said that internet pornography is more addictive now than crack cocaine. Do you have any idea why that might be? If you think about it, with crack cocaine, you have to have the chemical. So somebody who's addicted to the chemical, if they have no access, over time, they can be free of it. With internet pornography, it comes into the visual field. After a very short while, you don't need a cell phone. You don't need pornographic images on these media. They're in your imagination. You are a walking pornographic imagery, and it's very hard to be rid of those images. And that's why internet pornography is so addictive. So this has been the frightening discovery that even the secular world has become aware of, and more how to treat this is become at issue that puts addiction treatment in a category that has never had to be dealt with before. I'm going to read from the Pontifical Council for Social Communications, entitled Pornography and Violence in the Communications Media, a Pastoral Response, dated 1989. Again, a long time ago, considering how infant some of these media are now available. It was not until 2003 that internet became available on cell phones. I quote, "The communications media, which can be such effective instruments of unity and understanding, can also sometimes be the vehicles of a deformed outlook on life, on the family, on religion, and on morality. An outlook that does not respect the true dignity and destiny of the human person. In particular, parents in many areas of the world have expressed understandable concerns about films, video cassettes, and television programs their children can see, about the records their children can hear, and about the publications their children can read. They rightly do not want to see the moral ideals inculcated in the home undermined by objectionable materials all too easily accessible in all too many places, often through the communications media." End quote. When a person ceases to engage in the worship of God or gets distracted from where we really want to place our attention, he or she can become consumed by the worship of false gods or self. And ultimately, this really leads to a deformation of the human person, truly an isolation or a desolation from the dignity of being created in God's image and likeness. So to bring this up a little bit, I want to close my session reading from a quote from Pope John Paul II's Ut Unum Sint, and this is from paragraph 82. "The Holy Spirit calls us to make a serious examination of conscience, to enter into what might be called a dialogue of conversion. This dialogue, which takes place before God, each individual must recognize his own faults, confess his sins, and place himself in the hands of the one who is our intercessor before the Father, Jesus Christ. The dialogue of conversion with the Father on the part of the community, with a full acceptance of all its demands, is the basis of fraternal relations, which will be something more than mere cordial understanding or external sociality." So it's those fraternal relationships and the grace of the sacraments that we have as Catholics that are such powerful instruments for us to really take hold of and evangelize to those that we minister to. With that, I'll close my session. Thank you.